want to come back to talking about death again. I received an email from Venerable Chuni, and she was saying that she really appreciated especially my last talk about death, when I was saying, what are people going to say thinking about Madhyamaka philosophy when my father died? And I said, well, yeah, you're supposed to apply all the philosophy to your life. And she was commenting, because her mom died just a couple of months ago, that in talking with many people, even people who are Buddhists, there's some reluctance or something, going on about this, so that she began to doubt her own perspective, because you remember that she gave some talks reflecting on her mother's death and so on, from a very Buddhist perspective, And she was saying that, many people have told her, oh, now she's an orphan. And, Venerable I think Venerable Chuni's about 60 now. And she said, I gave up the ability to be an orphan over 40 years ago, So she found it strange that people were saying that. And how people were saying, no matter how much you practice, losing a parent is still difficult. And people telling her there's a special kind of attachment between parents and children. Yeah. And so she was reflecting that, and I agree with this, because scientists or psychologists often talk about infants having to bond with their parents, and that they have a certain kind of attachment for their parents. And so they use the word attachment in that case. And they also show that people who have a good kind of with the parent and the child, especially the mother and the child, have a good attachment, that those babies grow up to be people who are less anxious and more confident and so on. And so she was reflecting, yes, that's true, and that seems to be a good kind of attachment, but it's good only in the sense that we are sentient beings with bodies and minds under the influence of ignorance, afflictions, and karma. And so given our situation, then those kind of bonds are very good for a healthy psychological and physical upbringing. Yeah, but it's within that situation of us being samsaric beings, which means that if you were liberated beings, then that probably wouldn't happen, in that same way. Yeah. Okay. At least, that liberated beings may, of course, show a certain aspect for the benefit of sentient beings. The high bodhisattvas, they appear and do things like ordinary sentient beings. But, from their own side, perhaps that wouldn't be necessary. And, in the same way that, when you deeply meditate on emptiness, the loss of your parent or of, somebody who's very dear to you would not be as, heart-wrenching as it would be if, one hasn't really meditated on emptiness. And here, when I mean meditated on emptiness, I don't mean just understanding the philosophy, but actually applying it to your life, and thinking about the people that you're very attached to, and who are they really, and who is really dying. Yeah, who is really being reborn. And the same thing with regards to ourselves, who is really dying, and really, with regards to ourselves, asking ourselves, what in this body is worth clinging to at the time of death? Of course, while we're alive, we want to keep our body healthy and so on, because it's the basis on which we practice the Dharma, so it's important to take care of our body. But at the time of death, when there's no choice but to separate from it, then can we let go and offer our body up, or are we, going to be clinging on to it? And so that's going to depend a lot, I think, on whether we've applied Madhyamaka philosophy to our own situation. Yeah. So, it could be that sometimes, she was commenting that it seems to be hard for people, even some people who are Buddhist, to really challenge some of the well-established societal norms and beliefs, and I've kind of noticed the same thing too. Yeah, but I think these are exactly the kinds of things that we have to challenge in order for our practice to really alleviate our suffering. And I know one thing that I think is wise to challenge is in normal society is if, people think if you don't miss somebody and long to be with them, that somehow you don't care about them. Yeah? And I remember my niece, when she was just a child, to her, I love you and I miss you meant the same thing. Yeah? But I think they're different. I think you can really value somebody in your life, but not miss them, so to speak. Yeah? And that missing people isn't necessarily a good barometer for how much you care. It could sometimes be how attached you are to the person. Because I know that when, for example, within the last year, Geshe Sonam Rinchen died, and he was a very precious teacher for me. And I miss him in the sense that I can no longer go to him with my questions and my doubts, because he had an incredible way of answering questions and really clarifying things, and especially in sticky situations, that aren't directly described in the text. He was really able to apply the Dharma and give wonderful advice. So I miss him in my life, yeah. But I'm not weeping, yeah. And I know in the past, when some of my teachers have passed away, when I cried, it was very much out of gratitude that these people were in my lives to start with. Yeah, it was like, how in the world did I create the karma to meet these great masters? Because for me, personally speaking, the death of my teachers has been much more difficult than the death of anybody else, because they were, so crucial in my life. But like I said, a lot of times it's just kind of a sense of wonder that I was able to meet them to start with, and tears of sadness because they aren't here to be of benefit to sentient beings. And I remember when Trijang Rinpoche passed away, this was in 1971, and I went to puja at Tushita, and Lama Yeshe was, crying. And I'm sure he was crying for sentient beings upon having lost access to such a great master, On the other hand, another one of my teachers, who was also a disciple of Trijang Rinpoche, he continued to have class on that very day that Rinpoche passed away, and he was radiant. And you could just see that he was thinking, okay, Rinpoche isn't here now. Now I have to do what Rinpoche would do to be of benefit. And he really, and under, the practice of joyous effort, he took up the armor. He took it up and he was going forward. And he taught us that whole afternoon, just shining. Yeah? So, from these two examples, I saw, there could be different ways of responding when people who are important in your life die. But in both cases here, they were really responding from a Dharma perspective, not from a perspective of clinging or attachment or agony or something like that. And so this happened quite early on in my practice. Yeah, it was in 1981. Did I say 71? It was 81, sorry. It was 81. And so it had a very strong impact on me. It was really my model for, okay, here's how I have to train my own mind. Yeah, so you're saying even though we have the Dharma, we have so much conditioning to hold on to a person. So you were saying that we delude ourselves sometimes, even not wanting to accept the Dharma, and that when you heard me first talk about this in a previous BBC, you thought it was sacrilegious. Yeah, that was the emotional response, again, because of that kind of conditioning. And because, like in your case, the conditioning is, if I don't miss them, then I'm a bad person. So I'm guilty. Yeah, so we may have that kind of conditioning. And so then when somebody even dares mentioning that you can still care for a person without missing them, then the mind goes, no, impossible, sacrilegious, because you don't want to fall into guilt. But these are exactly the kinds of residual assumptions and preconceptions that we have to identify in our own mind and root out. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, so when this kind of stuff comes up in the mind, instead of going, oh, I shouldn't be thinking like this, go, well, where did that come from? And what is the Dharma way to think in this situation? And then recondition ourselves. Yeah, and society may say, oh, you're so terrible. You're not hysterical, crying and throwing yourself on the ground. But, what to do? Okay, so you're saying that, when your mom died, what made it difficult for you was that then you realized you were next in line, and, the next generation in line, and not having thought much about your own death, then you had to then think about that, so you couldn't pay a lot of attention to your mom, so to speak. Yeah, the more, and it's true, the more we have prepared for our own death, the less other people's death is going to be so shocking. Okay, so you say that when the Buddha passed, then those who had not attained realizations were pulling their hair and sobbing, and the Arhats said to them, look, what the Buddha's been teaching us all along is whatever arises ceases. So this is the time to apply what the Buddha himself has been telling us. Yeah. So they say that the Buddha's first teaching was on impermanence when he taught the 5 bhikshus at Deer Park, and his last teaching was on impermanence when he himself passed away. Yeah. Really emphasizing, how crucial it is in our life to accept impermanence.